Trails into Reverie, the final chapter in the Trails of Cold Steel series, and the bookend entry in the first saga of the Trails franchise. This entry in the series is a bit unorthodox in that it was created with the intention of concluding the first saga while also setting up the second saga by giving closure to the settings and characters from the past 9 games in the series. This is called a denouement, which is basically a part of the story where loose ends are resolved. This is done throughout the story with a new mechanic called Daydream Episodes, which are standalone stories that focus on specific characters and parts of Zemuria that haven't been explored in the Cold Steel series yet. As a fan of Trails III's approach to story and writing, I was overjoyed to see the series return to this format. Allowing the writers to break away from the norms of the series to focus on character interactions and world building is what I feel this Cold Steel arc is desperately needed. But as always, the question here is, does Trails into Reverie deliver with the story, and does it properly conclude the first saga? Let's find out in this Trails into Reverie review, analysis, recap. I don't know what it is anymore, but we're almost done with it. Let's go. Trails into Reverie begins in Crossbell 5 months after the Continental War and a little before the post-game credits scene of Cold Steel 4. And at this point, Crossbell is under military occupation by the IDF, which we see come to an end as the SSS carries out a coup with every single major character from the Crossbell arc assisting. This includes Wazy, Yuna, and Arios of all people, which I'll get into later. The SSS and Yuna raid Orcus Tower once again to find that the IDF is on the roof, where we learn about the IDF's goal. They want to reignite the war and take revenge on Calvard to restore Erebonia's pride and honor. Lloyd notes that they're still acting as if they're under the influence of the Great Twilight, even though it should be long gone. Lloyd gives one of his patented speeches, defeats the IDF, and finally, after 7 games of inevitable struggles and getting over barriers, Crossbell is finally liberated. As the sun sets, Kia and friends reunite, celebrate, and the camera pans out to what looks like a monitor as though they're being watched. The monitor cuts out and the credits of the game roll, only for it to glitch out, showing a strange red logo. Something that's interesting here is that Kia's name doesn't glitch out here like everyone else's, which will become apparent later. Despite the happy ending for Crossbell, we're shown an ominous message from our narrator stating that everything we just witnessed was within a predicted margin of error made in the first phase that will now be shifting into the second phase of the project. The story resumes on March 15th, which is slated to be the day of Crossbell's independence. Lloyd walks around with Wazy and Noelle, where we're able to see a few familiar faces, including Estelle, Joshua, Tita, Agate, as well as Ren's family, who we learn has met with Ren over dinner between CS4 and now. We also meet up with the recovered Shizuku and Arios, who acknowledges his crimes but is universally forgiven for them, which I still find to be really strange. From this point, the SSS begins to investigate the law firm, and we're switched over to Reen's route. I personally love the Trails to Walk mechanic in this game. Segmenting the story into multiple routes that eventually converge gives the player the freedom to choose their progression while also staying focused, which really benefits the pacing in this type of game. Vanilla Ware's 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim does something similar to this, in that the game will let you progress at your own pace between multiple characters, which allows the player to see multiple perspectives of the story to piece together the plot themselves. It's rare to see narratives in video game structure like this, so if you like this, definitely check out 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. Gotta give it the shout out, I love that game to death. It needs more recognition. The start of Reen's route starts in media res, which means in the middle of the story, with Reen and New Class 7 fighting against a mysterious man and Claire and Ymir. The mystery man ends up knocking Kurt off the ledge before we're thrown back in time to New Class 7 and Claire chilling in Ymir. One thing that's apparent in that last cutscene is how much the animation quality has gone up. If I recall correctly, this game is where Falcom started to incorporate motion capture into their cutscenes, and it's really showing. And as we'll see throughout Reverie, they took this game to experiment with new ideas before Kurono Kiseki. At this point, New Class 7 meets Reen's parents, and we learn that Aurelia has sent all of them here on a special assignment. Later that evening, we're shown a heart-to-heart between Claire and Reen in the hot springs. In their conversation, they both agree that they escaped it to their work and also blame themselves for the way that the wars, plural, panned out. Once we progress into Ymir Canyon for the mission, Claire turns to the party and the mystery man shows up to test New Class 7. Long story short, they barely win and New Class 7 proves themselves worthy. We also learn that this mystery man is actually Kurt's father, Matthias Vander. But before they're able to return to Ymir, they stumble upon multiple magic knights, which shouldn't be happening as Erebonia is seemingly at peace right now. Once they defeat the magic knights and return to Ymir, we learn that Olivier, Shira, and the Courageous have gone missing and that we need to find them, which is why we needed to be tested by Aurelia for this mission, which I still find really weird from a writing standpoint, because we've been through a civil war, a world war, the end of the world. Why do we need to be tested? We've literally saved the world like 3 times. Later in the hot springs, we see Reen confronted by the guilt of his past, which will come up throughout his route. Matthias joins him and thanks him for helping Kurt grow and gives him guidance, ending Reen's first act. Switching back to Lloyd's route, the SSS explores the Geofront where they defeat an Archaism. which I've learned I've been saying wrong the whole time. Everything is seemingly in order afterwards as Lloyd sees a strange apparition hovering in the corner. Concerned that he's the only one that saw it, he simply decides to just ignore it for now. Later that day, the ceremony declaring Crossbell's independence begins, and just before the ink is set to paper, Rufus shows up to crash the party with his EDF. We end up fighting them only to be completely shut down. Rufus defeats Lloyd, and Crossbell is invaded by the previous villains of the Crossbell arc, which is Dieter, Garcia, and this ugly ass dude. The citizens are taking under the same influence as the Great Twilight and begin to cheer for Rufus, and Lloyd's route ends. Reen and New Class 7 learn of the events of the reoccupation of Crossbell as they're shown a message from a strange man named C, stating that he'd be going to Heimdallr. Nothing good happens in Heimdallr. We gotta stop going there. Just remove it from the map. Nothing good happens there. This begins C's route of the story, where we see Nadia finessing some soldiers. Her and Swin end up running into C, who helps them out by fighting with a machine that looks eerily similar to the one that Ouroboros uses. From here, C takes the case from them and they comedically realize that C was the person they needed to deliver to all along. They open the case to find a young girl who's actually a Rosenberg doll, in the same way that Lloyd found Kia in Trails from Zero. That's the game. In the opening of the game plays. It was really cool to see Swin and Nadia in motion after reading 3 and 9. I think the author was really able to capture their moveset and their personality, and I hope we continue to get that throughout the series. From here, we continue through C's route into Heimdallr. This particular party's group dynamic was a breath of fresh air following the large cast of the Erebonia arc. It was nice to see a small group again that could actually interact in depth with each other without having to go through Reen. I also enjoy that the writers are able to have fun with this cast because at this point, Erebonia isn't at the verge of global calamity anymore. At this point, Reen and C's parties are both investigating Heimdallr for information. Reen ends up meeting with Elise, Elliot, Eustace, Milliam, Alphen, and Governor Regnitz where they debrief on the situation at hand. Erebonia is experiencing a restriction in economic, information, and citizen flow due to the situation in Crossbell, and it seems that they're back on the verge of conflict. We deduce that C's goal is to punish the defecting members of the army, and Reen finds half of a mysterious mirror in his pocket, ending the route. Act 2 begins, and Lloyd wakes up in a boat shed to the voice of who I assume to be the Grandmaster stating, "A new story is in motion. Your fate is but one thread intermingled with many." As Lloyd attempts to make his way back into the city, he finds that it's been completely occupied and patrolled by the EDF, and that he's too injured to do anything about it. He and Risha are eventually found by the EDF only to be saved by Lecter, who even surprised me at this point. I was not expecting him to show up at all. They make their way to Armorica Village where they meet with Risha and Ellie. Ellie reveals that she dropped the ball and allowed Kia to go missing during the confusion in Crossbell City, and Lloyd puts the Riz on her. I forgot I wrote that. That's funny. After a conversation with Speaker McDowell, a message is sent from an unknown party stating that Kia and Ilya are being held hostage in the ancient battlefield, so the party heads over there. But before we head out, Lloyd finds a mirror in his pocket similar to Reen, and the party is transported to a mysterious realm called the Reverie Corridor. Reen's party is also transported to this realm, and the group is called upon by a mysterious voice. She basically says to the group that they can use this realm to become stronger and grind out their stats for cosmetics and stuff like that. And as someone whose favorite game in the series is Trails the Third, I absolutely love this section of the game. This dungeon crawler portion of the game allows for the writers to give characters their much needed interactions and also have fun with a bunch of ideas due to the realm not impacting the real world. I'm not sure why people had issues with that in Trails the Third, to the point that skipping the game is such a popular talking point. Everything that Trails the Third in this game entail are what make the series so great to me. We get expanded world building, a ton of character interactions, and overall fun dialogue. And Trails into Reverie adds even more reason for players to explore this section by adding in a gacha system that allows players to pull side stories, playable characters, cosmetic items, and mini games throughout their playthrough, which was a lot of fun for me to explore personally.
Yeah, the bath towel.
No shoes. What? I'm keeping this on. Nah, that's crazy. Throughout the next section of Act 2, C and Reen's routes overlap and we switch between the two. Lapis ends up running into Milliam while Nadia steals her Arcus, and the party tracks them down for the rest of the day. The two end up clashing and C's group flees underground, where we find that the Imperial Army and the EDF are teaming up and plan on starting a coup d'etat on the Empire. When the party attempts to stop them, the soldiers stop their magic with the Black Orbment, which if you've played Trails in the Sky, you should be familiar with. And I gotta stop the video at this point right here because I'm super excited to let y'all know that y'all need to understand how important this is. Like, we're seeing the Black Orbment in 2023. Do you remember who originally retrieved the Black Orbment in Trails in the Sky? That's right, it's one of my favorite characters of all time, Kurt Nardin. That means we're indirectly getting a reference to Kurt Nardin in Trails into C's party ends up ascending into the graveyard overlooking Heimdallr, only to be met by Crow and Reen's party. The two parties fight, and C is revealed to be none other than Rufus Albera, closing out Act 2 of these routes. When we switch back to Lloyd's perspective, we find that Hugh has taken Ilya and Kia hostage along with the help of Garcia, and it's revealed that Shan snitched on them under the influence of the curse, and we all fight. Once the day is saved, Ilya turns on the party and reveals her new identity under the influence of the curse. We're saved by Zeit and Wazy as she joins Hugh, ending Act 2 for everyone. Act 3 begins in C, or Rufus's group being transported in Jingo's airship. We learn that the Rufus in Crossbell is an imposter and that C, the real Rufus, was in prison and targeted for assassination by the EDF. Here, Rufus restates his goal in wanting to clean up the mess that the Ironbloods made during the war. Later, Rufus and Lapis have a deep philosophical conversation about what makes a person good or bad. Rufus wholeheartedly admits that he's a bad person to Lapis and admits that he's just using her, Swin, and Nadia for his own personal gain. Lapis, being a doll, comes to the conclusion that people don't exist because of their actions or background and that those factors don't make people good or bad. She believes that the act of being is what makes a human human. From here, Rufus begins to reflect on his past and the moment he began searching for meaning in his life. As the son of a family who only saw him as an object to gain power, he was inspired by Osborn, who he aimed to overcome to find meaning in his life. Rufus failed at this goal and, to this day, still believes that he lives a meaningless life. Lapis's words seem to make him reorient his goal. This is easily one of the best scenes in the franchise and one of the best scenes in the Cold Steel arc, hands down. Easy. I love that the writers were able to give this party a lot more depth and interactions after having to deal with the burden that is the writing for Old Class 7. When the party lands in Crossbell, everyone except for Lapis starts to succumb to Ilya's curse on the TV, only to be saved by Ren of all people. They end up making their way back to the Black Workshop with the goal of restoring Lapis's memory for a lead on Crossbell situation before the route comes to the convergence point. Lloyd, Kia, and Wazy arrive at St. Ursula by boat in order to make their way towards the Rhineford military factory. A flashback to how the party came to be plays to reveal that pretty much everyone just abandoned Lloyd to focus on their loved ones in this situation. And I thought this justification for making room in the party was kind of hilarious because literally everyone bails on the SSS's mission one by one. Risha wants to take care of Shan, Ellie wants to take care of her grandpa, and then everyone's just like, I got my own thing to do, which I think is kind of weird but also funny at the same time. The party runs into Tio, who is apologizing to city evacuees. The curse overtakes them and they begin to blame the SSS for failing Crossbell. This begins to break Lloyd before Wazy steps in, and Wazy blames the citizens for making the SSS a symbol of hope when they were just another branch of the police department, nothing more than that. They aren't there to make Crossbell's problems just magically go away. This was a great development for Crossbell as well as Lloyd's character, even if this did already kind of happen in Azure. Lloyd has been doubting his ability to save Crossbell when in reality it's not just up to him and the SSS to bear that burden. Lloyd is burdening himself for not being able to save a city that relies on him too much, and he's just now realizing it again. After this scene, the party goes underground to the newly built railway to find a gate and Tita fighting off some EDF soldiers. They join the party and we reach the convergence point. From this point on, Rufus and Lloyd's routes converge. Elisa and Sharon join Lloyd's party at the entrance of the Rhineford military factory, only to eventually be met with a locked door and a computer. Here, the party unknowingly communicates with Rufus's anonymous party and the Black Workshop via computer, and the two of them coordinate to unlock each other's doors. One thing about Lloyd's character that I haven't really been able to point out is that he always seems to know exactly who is behind something but never speaks up to the party. Like, he's always like, I think that's, nah, it can't be. And the party's like, who was that? And he's like, nah, I'll tell y'all later. And then when they actually figure out who it is, they're like, I knew that. As a detective, I feel like hunches like this are something you should speak up on, but what can I do? As Rufus's party progresses, they're eventually split apart, which leads to some great individual development, the best being between Rufus and Lapis once again. In her scene, Lapis reflects on her growth, identity, and development of humanity since traveling with everyone, and she believes that she's a doll and wonders if gaining her memory would negate anything she's experienced since losing it. Rufus questions how one develops fear and also relates Lapis' struggle of identity to his own. The two of them come into a room full of Lapis dolls that pile onto the real Lapis, and Rufus is able to find the real one and pull her out, and reinforces that her identity is her own, regardless of whether or not she's a clone. And once again, these two have some of the best writing in the series so far, and I hope that whoever's writing these scenes continue to do so in Kuro. Swin and Nadia encounter the Emperor, who was seen in the novel 3 and 9, and he turns out to be a fake created by Novartis. He appears via hologram to reveal that for the most part, Ouroboros and the Grandmaster have nothing to do with the conflict in Crossbell, and that their involvement ended with the ending of CS4. By the end of this part of the route, Lapis gets her memory back and Rufus's route ends with the Emperor's orb ominously glowing. Lloyd's party encounters the true Novartis, who summons McBurn to fight the party, but just like the Emperor, this McBurn turns out to be a clone as well that has the same power as the true McBurn. Once this clone realizes that he's not the original McBurn, he helps the party out and acts with the will of the real McBurn, going so far as to tell Lloyd to tell Ash and Crow that he said hi. The factory is destroyed and the party is saved by Noel, ending the act for Lloyd. Reen's party takes Rufus's lead and heads towards the Nord Highlands, accompanied by Mueller. The party meets with Sarah, Emma, and Guys before we reach the convergence point of the route, which happened really fast this time around. From here, the party reaches the Watchtower to find the Empire seemingly stocked up for an all-out war. They return to the village to find some cavalry tanks were deployed on the Highlands, and when the party stops them, they find that they're all unmanned. The party meets with Aurelia and Schmidt, who joins them in raiding the Watchtower for answers, and at the top of the Watchtower, the party finds Arios of all people, who's actually just a robot. The Empire's stock of weapons ends up being a hologram that's concealing the Courageous where Olivier is being held hostage. We play as Olivier, who meets up with the party and defeats a possessed Dalton, who wanted to use Olivier as a cover for his actions on the Highlands. From here, a skirmish breaks out between Calvert and the Empire and everyone works to stop it. Reen ends up confronting the Arios clone in a battle between 8 Leaves 1 Blade users, while Sarah discovers a large cannon pointed at the settlement, preparing to fire, similar to the ending of Cold Steel 1 and Trails to Azure. In a bout of helplessness and desperation, Reen overlooks the village as he's overcome with a vision of a mech similar to Valimar activating. Reen jumps off the edge and summons something called Tyrfing S to his aid and flies towards the cannon. The name Tifring comes from a magical sword in Norse mythology that was created by dwarves, which as we know play a big role in this story. I actually haven't really talked about it too much, but pretty much everything in the Cold Steel arc goes back to Norse mythology. For example, Heimdallr is named directly after the Norse god, which is called the Watchman of the Gods. Valimar might have taken his name from Lord of the Rings of all things too, so it's pretty interesting to look into the etymology of different things in the games that you like. You might learn something. Back to the story though, as the villagers brace for impact, Reen slashes the missile in half inside this new mech, and looming over the sky is the 8th Divine Knight, which swiftly destroys the Courageous and the other airships in the area before straight up leaving. Inside the mech, we find that Reen has gray hair again and a new golden eye, no 007. He tells everyone that he feels sad from the images that he saw, but he's also so happy that he could cry at the same time. This ends Act 3 for Reen. Now at this point in the story, I was kind of over it and confused, because Reen, a character with 5 games worth of character development, is getting another transformation, another power-up. I feel like his character was just way too drawn out and stretched thin, because why does he need all this again? I feel like the writer just kept adding to his character without actually trying to resolve anything. Like, he kept repeating the same character development over and over while getting new cool stuff. And in the moment, I felt like this came out of left field, even though it was explained later. At the start of Act 4, Reen's party makes contact with the Calvert army, who creates a temporary peace treaty as they clean up Nord. Roselia meets with the party and explains to Reen that she believes what happened to him was something called a resonance phenomenon, where he and the 8th Divine Knight resonated with each other. The party travels across Bell via Spirit Path in order to gain intel on the situation, and they end up in Mishlim only to find it occupied by the EDF, which they swiftly overtake. They find their way to the Castle of Mirrors, which is now seemingly, or maybe just conveniently, connected to another world. Once the party reaches the end, Reen finds himself consumed by the mirror and has to face himself as he did many times throughout the series. Here, he begins to see his failures and all the people he's let down or let die in the past, and he denies this false reality and breaks out of his doubt as his hair and eyes transform back to its normal color. Once he rejoins the party, they're encountered by a person that Reen identifies as the true king of the New World. And this person looks exactly like Reen in the bad ending of Cold Steel 4, and uses Zoa Balar in combat. Reen defeats him and accepts that he will always be himself no matter what form he takes. This doesn't defeat him completely though, as Ultra Reen summons Zoa Gilstein to leave, which is now labeled as the 0th Knight. Before leaving though, he individually wishes everyone well, showing that he existed and interacted with each one of them in the past. The party concludes that the 0th Knight was being held here in Disneyland the whole time and recovers Olivier's artifact, which stops the signal jamming across Erebonia and Crossbell, ending Act 4 for Reen. In Rufus's route, Lapis decides that the party needs to get in contact with Ian Grimwood, who's still in prison after the events of Trails to Azure. On the way, the party runs into Duvali, who fights Rufus on sight for killing Arianrod. She joins the party after the group explains Rufus' situation, postponing their duel. Once the party reaches the prison, they're jumped by multiple Arios clones, only to be saved and joined by the real Arios. Once the party reaches Ian in the prison, it's revealed that Shizuku was under his care for some reason. And I think it's super weird that out of all the options for babysitting and Crossbow, Arios wanted Shizuku to stay in a high security prison with Ian Grimwood, who committed multiple war crimes in Trails to Azure. Also, the layout of the prison is super weird because like, why is there no one in there? Why are there so many winding corridors? Why is Ian Grimwood being held on the outside of the prison where someone could easily just blow up a hole in the wall, which we see later? I don't know, it's kind of weird. Don't think about it too much. The party is attacked by the Emperor mid-conversation, who turns into a monster due to the artifact he held. Zai jumps in to save the party, and Swin and Nadia deal the final blow to the Emperor once and for all. Once we're able to speak with Ian, it's revealed that Speaker McDowell is allowing Ian to conduct monitored research while he's in prison. While in prison, Ian was contacted via computer by someone named Elysium and had been covertly communicating with them in his cell. Through their conversation, he learned that Elysium had limitless knowledge but gathered it for no purpose and confirmed it to be an AI that could calculate the future. He theorized that Elysium was created through the convergence of the orbital network and the spirit veins and eventually gave the AI the administrator name, Lapis. Elysium was eventually taken over by an unknown entity, so it contacted Jorg Rosenberg to create a doll to transfer its conscious into, which became our Lapis. The party and Ian leave the prison and leave Shizuku in the stalls for his care, and find the Crossbell's communications are open again, ending Act 4 for Rufus. Lloyd's group sets off to the EDF-occupied village of Maines to meet with the CGF and Randy. Once they meet up with Randy, they're joined by Toa and Machias, who inform them of Muriel and Sonia's status. The two of them are holding out at a nearby moon temple where Muriel was gravely injured. The party sets out to the moon temple and are joined by Estelle and Joshua as they press on. When the party arrives at the moon temple, they find that Ilya was leading the EDF, and the party confronts and defeats her as she flees to Crossbell City, where the final stage of the story unfolds, ending Act 4 for Lloyd. And real quick, I want to talk about Lloyd's route for the most part throughout this game. Even though this story is mainly about liberating Crossbell, this is really about Rufus's character and Reen's character, and concluding their character arcs. So Lloyd really gets the shaft in this story. Most of the story beats are just rehashes of what already happened in Trails to Azure, even down to Randy having a standoff in front of Maine's village. At the start of the finale, the three parties host a Zoom call together and conduct a plan to retake Crossbell City, which is set to be executed the next day. During the raid, Rufus confronts his clone, who details the logic behind his actions. The clone Rufus is only acting the way he is because he's following Rufus's desire to be a perfect being, worthy of acknowledgement. Its goal is to unify all of Zemuria into one being and offers to allow Rufus to take his place, as it knows that's what Rufus truly desires deep down. Meanwhile, Rufus's clone self-destructs as a massive weapon called the Retributive Tower demolishes Yuno Naval Fortress and takes its place. Interestingly, the original name for this tower was the Reverse Babel Tower, which is the tower from the Bible obviously, furthering the religious symbolism throughout this series. And I'm not sure why the localizers changed this name because it does show up untranslated at certain points in the game. They changed it in one instance and then they decided to not change it in certain other ones, which is kind of weird. But anyway, the new president of Calvard, Roy Gramhart, joins the air FaceTime and tells Crossbell that he's mobilizing his army to occupy Crossbell in response to his threat to Calvard, pressing the party to destroy it. This parallels the way that Osborn tried to use the orbital shutdown phenomenon as an excuse to invade Liberal and Trails III, which I really liked. Just like Osborn and Trails III, Roy's decision here from a writing standpoint builds up his character, how he operates his republic, while also adding immediate stakes to the story. The parties regroup and plan to siege the tower the following day. Once the party reaches the top of the tower, the party is confronted by Reen Alter, and here, Lloyd makes his final deduction on who this Reen truly is, a calculation of what Reen would have become during the bad ending of Cold Steel 4, similar to Kia's prediction at the end of Trails to Azure. I thought this was an interesting spin on the alternate timeline trope from a writing perspective, since all the clones are computer calculations strictly based on data and observation. Ishmelga Reen explains the reason Reen transformed earlier was due to those two versions of himself failing to properly assimilate or converge into each other once they met in Nord. Ishmelgareen tells the party that he was sent to this reality by Elysium to save itself and Zemuria from any further destruction. This would have been done by killing the heroes of this reality and unifying everyone towards peaceful times. The party vows to choose their own future and they all fight. After the fight, Ishmelgareen summons Zola Gilstein, and in response, the Hexen clan summons the Panzer Soldaten to combat them. Reen has a moment of growth here as he acknowledges that the altar isn't him. Reen admits that he almost chose the bad ending of Cold Steel 4 for himself, but didn't give up because he knew that his death would hurt his loved ones. Once the two clash, Reen hears the voice of Valimar, who gives them the strength to deal the final blow to Zola Gilstein and Reen Alter. Once this is done, Reen awakens in an Infinite Azure from Tekken 7 in front of the Red Arcued Reen, where he finally confronts the part of himself that's been burdening him since Cold Steel 1. Finally, after 5 games. In their conversation, Ishmelgareen tells Reen that the best option for everyone is for both of them to sacrifice themselves. While Reen acknowledges this is the best option for Zemuria, he tells Ishmelgareen that he deserves to be happy, despite not being the best option. Ishmelgareen gives himself up and the two beings are separated. I personally really loved this scene, but I wish that it would have happened as early as Cold Steel 3, because it would have given him a lot more room to develop as an adult, rather than trying to struggle with something he's been struggling with since a teenager. And I know that people probably disagree with that, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting if he just got that development out the way really early on. Even though people do struggle with depression for years on end, I don't think that Rie needs to struggle with this internal conflict for 5 whole games. And I'm saying that strictly from a writing perspective. Also, let's talk about the psychological symbolism of this interaction and Reen's character real quick. This scene is Reen confronting what's considered in Freudian psychology as his id. Your id is categorized as your unconscious or impulsive thoughts, and Ishmelgareen is the embodiment of that. This version of Reen is one where he gives into the dark thoughts of his id and sacrifices himself. Reen himself throughout these games reflects and embodies his superego, which carries the guilt and anxiety of your id thoughts. Reen feels burden and guilt over constantly thinking of sacrificing himself to save others throughout the Cold Steel arc. This scene is Reen accepting his id as a natural part of himself that makes him whole and overcoming it by acknowledging that it defines who he is. The curse of Erebonia is the collective id of Erebonia. This is why everyone affected by the curse slowly begins to hate their saviors throughout the Erebonia arc. They're projecting what they feel within their id deep down, and I think that everyone who dislikes the concept of the curse of Erebonia should think about the game under this lens instead. I really love this symbolism because it extends the Trails of Cold Steel series wide homage to one of my favorite games of all time, Xenogears. And if what I explained sounds interesting to you, definitely play and read up on Xenogears because it bases all its characters around different psychologies just like Reen's character is. Once Ishmelga is isolated, Reen's body returns to normal. The party fights and defeats Ishmelga, but their success is short-lived. Ishmelga grants its administrative privileges to the entirety of Zemuria. Because humanity's collective consciousness has been overcome by their id, they now have the power to eliminate what they hate, which is the entire party. As the party begins to teleport out, Rufus slips away and starts a global FaceTime. Here, he plays the role of the supreme leader and tells the entirety of Zemuria that everything is his fault, so everyone's hate focuses on him in hopes that he'd kill them and the tower instead of the party. I really like this plot point because it intertwines psychology and the logic of the curse that they've been building up the past few games. In response to this, the party re-enters the tower and confronts Rufus one last time. It's decided that C's party, Zeit and Lloyd and Eustace should be the group to confront him, and they ascend the tower. At the top, Lapis is saved by Ishmelgareen from falling debris, and he tells Lloyd that he saw something of importance at the end of the future. He begins telling Lloyd that something will happen in 3 years or less, and Lloyd cuts him off, saying that they'd be better off just not knowing anything that happens in the future. Whatever happens, Zemuria will get through it. Interestingly, this will place whatever event he's talking about at the end of Kuro's current arc, so maybe Kuro 3 or Kuro 4 or whatever this ends up being. Ishmelgareen disappears and all that's left is Rufus. Rufus monologues to himself, saying that he's lived a hollow life and that he was never able to become anything more than his father in the end. Once he sees the party, he's shocked that they'd even come to save him. In classic Lloyd fashion, Lloyd places him under arrest for his sins, but tells him that he's dumb for not realizing that he's loved by so many people. Rufus realizes in this moment that everything he ever wanted was right here in front of him the whole time, and the party teleports out of the tower moments before it's shot down by the final beam, destroying itself. The story skips ahead to the final scenes of the game. Crossbell is saved and being restored to normal. Reen and Crow attempt to find evidence of their divine knights returning for good, to find nothing, but it's actually revealed that Valimar is still silently watching over Erebonia. Lapis watches over a hospitalized Rufus as Olivier enters the room. He tells Rufus that he's officially being sentenced to death, but insinuated that it can only be enacted to people who are actually dead, heavily implying that he'll allow Rufus to live as a vagabond under the identity of C and publicly identify Rufus as dead. Swin and Nadia enter the scene as they all decide to travel the world as Lapis' bodyguards. And I like that the writers don't try to redeem Rufus here to the extent that the other villains in the series are, and how they handled writing C's group out of the story. The TV in the room turns on to show footage of Lloyd preparing a speech declaring Crossbell's independence. Just as Lloyd begins to speak, he states his name and the credits roll, ending the 9-game-long first saga of the Trails franchise. The credits show Lapis sitting on a hill looking at a scrapbook of everyone's activities after the ending of the game. When she closes it, we see C, Nadia, and Swin call out to her as she chases after them one last time. While this may be the end of Crossbell's struggle, this isn't the end of the game. Upon loading the game again, we're allowed to access the end of the Reverie corridor and uncover the truth behind it. When entering the Reverie corridor, the sphere attempts to terminate all its active processes. After progressing a bit, the party defeats a copy of McBurn's true form, and a white figure appears, warning the party to not progress. After we do the complete opposite, the girl is revealed to look like Kia, who refers to the party as invaders. The sphere reveals that the Black Mirror was created to watch over causality and guard its laws, and the Reverie corridor was created to provide a proving grounds to select the future Awakeners for the Divine Knights. It's also revealed that the sphere is Azoth, who is the creator of the Black Records. As the party continues ahead, it's revealed that the Kia lookalike is actually called OZXX, which is the first Originator Zero model that was created by the Gnomes in order to be a vessel for the Demiurgos. Since the Demiurgos containment is incomplete, OZXS has to stay behind and contain it, which is why it's pushing the party back. The Oomphy squad of Altina, Millium, Lapis, and Kia empathize with OZXX and decide that they want to free her, so the party fights an incomplete Demiurgos. OZXX disappears, thanking the party, which gives Azoth the full control to close the Reverie corridor. The party is granted the ability to perceive their experiences in the Reverie corridor as a dream rather than lose the memory of it, and they're all sent away, officially ending Trails into Reverie. Its final message being "See you again" in S1208. While the main plot of Trails into Reverie is finished, there are some important and not so important story elements to discuss in the Daydream episodes. Similar to the Doors and Trails of the Third, these episodes give closure to the characters of the first saga of the game while setting up for the next one. Some of my favorite ones include Reen's, Ash's, Lecter's, and most importantly, Kurt's, where he cross-dresses as Saint Estrella as Cartina. Personally, I think about that Daydream more than some main plot points in this game. I think it's hilarious. Rather than recap all of these, I'm gonna go over the ones that set up for the next game in the series. Look Back to Look Forward begins with the Grandmaster monologuing about the third stage of the Orphis final plan, called the Eternal Recurrence Plan. She says a bunch of vague stuff as McBurn forces his way into her presence in the Celestial Globe. The Grandmaster is surprised that he was able to find his way back here with only half of his memory, and she also states the last time McBurn was here was when he received his sword with Leeway. McBurn says that he thinks he's figured out who the Grandmaster truly is, but if he truly knew, he'd have to kiss his form goodbye. The Grandmaster replies, stating that McBurn is the only person who can beat Ouroboros' guiding bonfire. The two begin to talk about a new replacement for Arianrod as Novartis shows up. They reference a new group operating out of Ored, which is in North Zemuria. The group is interrupted by a FaceTime call by Calvert's president, Roy, who clarifies that he has no connection with the former. He greets the Grandmaster for the first time and makes a proposal saying that for the next 2.5 years, he won't interfere with their plans as long as they don't interfere with his plans to test the world's potential. This development is exactly what I was looking for from this game, a direct setup for the long-term story of the franchise and the goals of Ouroboros. But, as usual, we learn the bare minimum, but for the president of Calvert to be shown to have direct contact with Ouroboros before we even see Calvert itself is an incredible setup for an arc. This is also immediately followed by 3 even more direct setups to Kurono Kiseki. In order to set up for Kurono Kiseki's story, the writers created 3 daydreams that take on the form of short visual novels. As a fan of visual novels, strong writing, and world building, I was all for this. The writing throughout these short stories was relatively strong as there weren't any limits to the dialogue or pacing, they could just go all in. Even when you look back, this format of exposition is where we get some of the strongest moments in the series, such as Star Door 15, so I was super excited to go through these. The story An Unconventional Student follows Ren acting under the guise of a student in Calvert after transferring to the Genis Royal Academy. She becomes popular and is harassed by a boy named Ronald Griffith. The harassment comes to a head as Ronald hires a gang who attacks Ren and kills them, and it's revealed that Ronald and his father were being investigated by the CID, or the Central Intelligence Division. Overlooking the scene is a man named Dingo Brad, who is connected to Ren by Grace. Ren continues to live a normal life as a student council president until Kurono Kiseki. In another Hot Springs paradise, Ren and his family are invited to Long Lai and Calvert on vacation. Ren decides to go for a walk at night to look for his master Yun Cafe and is attacked by some members of the Ikaruga, a Jaeger clan in Calvert. The leading member of the group introduces himself as Kuragane and states that Ren is nothing compared to the princess. Ren struggles but eventually overpowers the group, and as he goes to finish them off, his sword is sliced in half by an unknown girl around his age. Ren realizes that she must also be a student of Yun's, which she responds by saying that Yun isn't here and that Ren needs more practice, ending this daydream. The third and final door, Forward Sword in Hand, follows a girl who refuses to take up the title of A-Rank Bracer. She feels that she's not worthy of the title even though she's been constantly asked, and it's revealed that Zin from Trails in the Sky is accepting the offer to become an S-Rank Bracer as well. The girl asks a bartender about some missing kids as she reminisces about her childhood friend who mysteriously disappeared for years. Later, she and Zin enact their plan to save the missing children in a base. Midway through, she realizes that every enemy that she spared and their leader were killed by a third party and confronts them. This third party spares her and leaves, telling her where the children were. The children were revealed to have been brainwashed to be turned into assassins but were captured by the CID. Once the girl returns to the guild, Zin promotes her to A-Rank Bracer, breaking the record for the youngest A-Rank Bracer of all time, beating out Sarah's original record. It's revealed that this girl's name is Elaine and that she's been chasing after a mysterious childhood friend. She still doesn't believe that she has what it takes to be a hero, but she believes she's strong enough to fight alongside the real hero of the story, her words. I like how this story is framed from a writing standpoint. At first you think that this is the next protagonist of the Kuro arc, but the ending shifts all the focus and anticipation towards this real protagonist. After the stories are complete, the box art of the game is revealed to be the Grandmaster weaving together these 3 strings of fate into one linear path. And I thought this reveal was cool, as I never really thought about what the cover art signified aside from the Grandmaster being on there and also not being in the game for some reason. I guess you could say that this was the real Trails in the Sky from Zero to Azure of Cold Steel into Reverie no Kiseki all along. Alright, cut. That was lame. That was so bad. I'm so sorry about that. So my final thoughts on Trails into Reverie and the Cold Steel arc as a whole. I enjoyed the way that Reverie ended the first Saga of the Trails franchise, but I didn't really feel anything towards the story weeks after finishing it. I love the writing for C's Party and the setup for Kuro, but I felt like most of the impactful moments in this game were way too long overdue for them to really have any impact on me personally. For example, Reen's character arc could have been a lot more interesting if his defining moments in this game happened way earlier in the Cold Steel arc. Imagine how much better the writing for Cold Steel 3 and 4 could have been if the writers were able to move on from developing Old Class 7. I also personally feel that the conflict in Crossbill has been going on for so long that when it ended here, it felt more like relief rather than liberating. And a big part of why I felt this way is because Lloyd's route took a backseat throughout this game, even though it should have been a primary focus. The writers placed more emphasis on Reen's character development rather than the people who have been fighting for Crossbill for 7 literal games at this point, and I feel that's reflective of how the series has been the past 10 years. That's a huge reason why I enjoyed C's route so much. The writers were finally able to try something new rather than sticking to elements that have been in the series since 2013. And I feel like most of the Cold Steel arc was burdened by the weight of established elements of the series that would disappoint fans if changed. And this is why characters never died or stayed dead and why Old Class 7 stuck around for as long as they did. Most of my feelings of this game stem from issues of execution and constraints of the Cold Steel arc due to factors such as the cast size and length, as well as my high expectations of the series, which really I can control, but that's on me. That being said, I did love how much fun the writers were able to have with this game. My favorite part of the game by far was going through all the daydreams and interacting with individual characters in the Reverie corridor. And the experimentation throughout the game without a doubt makes me excited for what's in store with Kuro no Kiseki, which I do need to address real quick. At the end of my Cold Steel 4 video, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do Reverie. I'm really busy now. Life is changing a lot, but I actually ended up finishing it. I pulled the classic, I got one more in me, Hideo Kojima type shit, and I actually ended up finishing it. But for real this time, this is the last Trails video I'm going to make in this format. So I started playing Trails and making these videos during the pandemic when we had a lot of time, but now I don't have time like that anymore. Like, I'm super busy nowadays. I'm actually in my last quarter of college. I'm about to graduate. Life is going to change a lot. And I don't want to stop making videos, but I need to start making shorter videos. So that being said, this is the last video where I'm going to do a full recap of the entire story of any of these games. I think I'm at the point now to where I can cut the length of these videos and focus in on individual aspects and themes of these games. So it won't be the end of me making Trails videos, it'll just be the end of me recapping the entire thing and giving y'all an hour-long SparkNotes version of it. I'm going to try to aim for like 20-30 minute videos if anything I do in the future. So Kuro, I might focus on the theme of that game or what I think and just really narrow in and focus in on like what I felt rather than just being like, then this character did this character did that. And I think this is a win-win for everyone except for people who like fall asleep watching my videos. I'm sorry for you guys, but we gotta lock in, y'all. It's time to get employed. It's time to I don't mean to throw slugs, but it's time to get employed. We gotta get up. Like, things change. This will give me a lot more time and energy to do other videos too, because I do a lot of other stuff outside of YouTube. Like, this isn't even probably my third priority in life right now. I just love doing this so much I make time to do it. But enough rambling. Once again, I want to thank y'all for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. I love making these videos. I thank y'all for watching it. And shout out to that one person on FF14 that recognized me from my videos. That was crazy. I was like in my pajamas confused that someone actually watched my videos and like actually remembered me by my FF14 username. That's crazy. But anyway, thank y'all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video sooner than you think. I know I'm late, but sooner than you think. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.